We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the acting Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Labor has refused to announce when it will release its 2035 emissions reduction targets. At COP29—
Order. The Minister for Climate Change is warned. It's a different day, but it's the same standards that we are all looking towards, which is no interjections whilst someone is on their feet. So the acting Leader will begin her question again.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Labor has refused to announce when it will release its 2035 emissions reduction target. At COP29, Minister Bowen said, "Next year, when we bring forward our nationally determined contributions, we must all strengthen efforts and deliver our highest possible ambition." Why is the Albanese Labor government keeping its target a secret? And can the Prime Minister guarantee that it won't lead to increased energy prices for Australian families?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I really do thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for the question. We passed legislation in this House for 43% by 2030, opposed by those opposite, and net zero by 2050, opposed by those opposite. When we passed the 43% by 2030, one of the provisions that was carried with amendments was that the Climate Change Authority had to give us advice about future targets. That is the law. That is the law. So it was passed by this Parliament, passed by the Senate in both chambers, and so the Climate Change Authority gives us the advice based upon the science, and
Order. The member for Herbert.
And then we announce the target based upon the science, consistent with getting to net zero by 2050. That's the process. That's the process. But for those opposite who don't have a 2030 target, to actually stand up and say, what's your target in 2035, that is after
Order. 2030, the member for Deakin,
is just extraordinary. Just extraordinary. So the Climate Change Minister will be giving his annual statement, again consistent with the legislation that was carried in this Parliament. He'll be giving that at the end of this week. But I'll give you a preview. I'll give you a preview. We are on track. We are on track for achieving the targets that we have established. Not only have we got a target, we've told you how we'll get there. We'll get there through the safeguard mechanism, firstly, taking the top emitters.
Seriously.
Order. The Assistant Treasurer will withdraw that remark. The Manager of Opposition Position on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, a very specific question. Can the Prime Minister guarantee it won't lead to increased energy prices for Australian families? If he can't give that guarantee, he should admit it.
Order. The question contained, why is the government keeping targets secret? Now, if the Prime Minister is explaining part of the question about the member for O'Connor will leave the chamber under 94A. If we're dealing with points of order, particularly from your manager, I would expect that you'd want to hear and show that respect. So the Prime Minister is being directly relevant. He wasn't asked about alternative approaches. He wasn't asked about alternative policies. He hasn't gone into that space. So I'm just going to listen carefully to make sure he's being directly. But he couldn't be more directly relevant if he's articulating why the government is pursuing what they're doing.
Speaker, the short answer is I'm complying with the law. That's the short answer. That those opposite, of course, don't have a target. We not only have a target of 43%, we've told you how we'll get there. The safeguard mechanism on the top emitters that's working, and the capacity investment scheme that is working even better than we envisaged. So we have a plan. We have a process to get there to that objective. Those opposite don't have a target for 2030, oppose net zero by 2050 and have a nuclear plan sometime in the 2040s and no idea how you keep reliability of energy supply in the meantime. None. No idea, no costings, no plan.
The call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief and building more homes, and is there anything standing in the way?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Gilmore for her question. Of course, our number one priority every day is relieving cost of living pressures. And there are three key ways that we're doing that. We're getting wages up, opposed by those opposite. We're bringing costs down through our cost of living measures, and we're getting inflation back to where it should be. We inherited inflation on the rise with a 6 in front of it, and now it's going down with a 2 in front of it, and that is important. And we know that housing is one of the big costs causing stress for Australians. Labor's Help to Buy program will help 40,000 Australians buy a home of their own. People who've worked hard and saved but still can't get a deposit. Now we're stepping up to help more Australians buy a home. We want to help with social housing through our Social Housing Accelerator, through the Housing Australia Future Fund. We want to help people who are renters through the increases that we've had in rental assistance. But we also want to help more people to buy their own home. Now, those opposite, right across the board, both there and down in the corner there, some of them, are teaming up, the Liberals and the Greens, to get in the way. The clue's in the title for why they oppose Help to Buy, because the Liberals never want to help and the Greens never want to buy. Now, Australia's housing shortage didn't happen overnight. It took a decade of a coalition government that for most of the time they were in office didn't even bother to have a housing minister. Didn't even bother to have a housing minister. But now they're still standing in the way, blocking help, playing politics instead of making progress, and in this case in the Senate, teaming up with the Greens political party. Well, there'll be a vote tomorrow in the Senate on the Help to Buy scheme, and that will be a test of whether the Greens political party will vote for something that's their policy, that they took to the election, a shared equity scheme. Because you can't actually build if you're just focused on protests and not focusing on progress. And that is what we are doing. They see issues to campaign on, we see challenges to act on. Now, blocking bills in the Senate and blocking housing in your respective electorates helps no one. So we think that this legislation should be carried. We're not waiting around for the Liberals and Greens, but it's a big test tomorrow in the other place to see whether the coalition continue to combine with the Greens to become the no-alition in just opposing good policy.
Call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Given emissions have gone up under the Albanese Labor government, how does the Prime Minister expect Australians to take this government seriously on climate action?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. The Minister has the call. The Manager was heard in silence. We're going to show the same respect to the Minister. The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and we on this side of the House welcome that question. You know, chutzpah is a wonderful word, Mr Speaker, and we've seen a wonderful example of it from the opposition today. A party and a coalition which presided over 10 years of denial and delay, which had 23 energy policies and couldn't land one, which can't tell the Australian people what its 2030 target is, or let alone its 2035 target, and which argues that renewable energy should be paused and we should rely more on coal and gas, Mr Speaker, while we wait decades for nuclear to come forward, has the temerity to ask this government a question about our policies, Mr Speaker. When we have legislated a Climate Change Act, when we've legislated safeguards reforms, when we've legislated new vehicle efficiency standards, which the member for Bradfield tried to do and got rolled by his cabinet, Mr Speaker, we've done it, which he couldn't deliver. He said we'll reduce emissions and he couldn't get it done. We've gotten it done.
Order.
We've got it done, and we're continuing to get those things done. And as the Prime Minister has foreshadowed, this week I will release the government's annual climate change statement in accordance with the Act. Now, that is world's best practice in terms of transparency and accountability when it comes to emissions reductions reports. I'll be releasing the Climate Change Authority's annual progress report, Mr Speaker, which I've received and will table in the House. And it will make clear, together with the government's projections—
Look, the question was broad in anyone's example, so the manager will be able to take a point of order. But if it's on relevance, when you ask a question about how can the government be taken seriously on climate action, and the minister is going through a detailed list of things about how the government is being serious on climate action, it's going to be difficult to take on relevance, but I'll hear the point.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It is on relevance. The fact is emissions have gone up. Can the minister—
The Leader of the House.
Just point of order, Mr Speaker. That was clearly an abuse. You advised that the minister was already relevant. He then took a point of order on relevance and then added nothing but a comment, added nothing to consideration of the standing orders at all. It was complete abuse.
This behaviour has been creeping in more and more, and you can't have a situation where I don't like the answer, so I'm just going to jump up and say something. That's never the way question time has been run, and it's not going to run that way now. I like to give everyone a fair go, and people are entitled to take a point of order and relevance, and particularly for the high office that the manager holds, but that's just taking the mickey. So the manager is now warned, just as I warned the Leader of the Opposition last week, we're not going to have that. It's not fair on everyone. The Minister, in continuation.
Mr Speaker, all these things the government has done, in addition to the capacity investment scheme, which is underpinning 32 gigawatts of new renewable and dispatchable energy, all of which has been opposed by those opposite, and all of which are contributing to emissions reductions in Australia, as will be outlined in the Climate Change Authority's advice and the forecast that will be released this week. And I look forward to the opposition's detailed policy response, which will outline, no doubt, the full costings of their nuclear plan, no doubt the emissions impact of the nuclear plan, which will see emissions balloon under their nuclear plan, Mr Speaker. I look forward to all those details from the opposition on Thursday. No doubt they've had plenty of opportunities. The member for Fairfax will have a lengthy opportunity to respond, and I'm sure it will be jam-packed full of policy detail.
When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to help Australians with cost of living pressures around housing, and what is standing in the way?
Call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the fantastic member for Macarthur for his question. And it gives me a great opportunity to update the House on Labor's bold and ambitious housing agenda, Speaker, an agenda that comes after a wasted decade under those opposite. As the Prime Minister reminded us, Speaker, a decade for most of which those opposite did not even have a housing minister. That's how tapped out of this problem they were.
Order.
Now, Speaker, the election of our government changed that attitude. We have a Commonwealth government stepping up, leading the country and working with the states to get better housing options for Australians. We're working to get the country building more homes. We're getting a better deal for renters, and home ownership, Speaker, is a critical part of that agenda. Now, in your electorate, Speaker, and in mine, there are low and middle income Australians who have been locked out of the housing market, key workers who need and deserve government's help to get into a home, childcare workers, teachers, nurses, cleaners,
and Labor's Help to Buy bill is part of the puzzle in addressing this. Now, I'm asked what stands in the way. What stands in the way, Speaker, are those opposite. They say no to everything. For every good thing our government is doing, there is nasty negativity and reckless opposition, and on housing it is no different. But the biggest hypocrites of all, Speaker, are the Greens. For everything our government has tried to do on housing this term, the Greens—
just to invite the minister to withdraw that comment.
I will withdraw that if you like. Absolutely, Speaker. Withdrawn. For everything our government has tried to do on housing this term, the Greens have worked in partnership with the opposition to block and delay. And the net effect, Speaker, of the Greens' presence in this parliament on housing is thousands of Australians who have been denied a home and fewer homeowners. It is not a record that I would be particularly proud of.
Australian Greens.
Now, they have a chance this week, Speaker, to redeem themselves by allowing our housing bill's passage through the Senate. Remembering, Speaker, that the Greens bought a scheme just like Help to Buy to their platform in the last election. We know that they support this scheme, and the only reason that they have blocked and delayed home ownership for childcare workers and nurses is because every time the Greens choose politics over progress for Australians. It is time for this juvenile charade to come to an end. The bill before the Senate will help tens of thousands of low-income people like nurses and childcare workers into home ownership, and the Greens must stop working with those opposite to deny these people those opportunities. Now, Australians will remember the actions of the Greens this week on the housing bills. Do the Greens want to go into the election having blocked and delayed everything and having stood in the path of childcare workers owning their own homes? Are they anything more than an ineffective party of protest? We will soon find out, Speaker. The ball is in their court.
Before I call the honourable member for Kooyong, I'd like to welcome and acknowledge some special guests today. We have the Mayor of the City of Greater Dandenong, Councillor Jim Mehmedi, His Excellency Mr Adrian Mara, the Ambassador of the Republic of Albania, and also Her Excellency Mrs Yetmira Bedejnaraja Shala, the Ambassador of the Republic of Kosovo. And I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery up there today are representatives from Mater Little Miracles, whose work to improve outcomes for mothers and babies in neocritical care helps give our tiniest and most vulnerable patients the best start in life. Oliver and his mum Louise are sitting in the gallery today. Oliver is 6 and was born at 25 weeks. And in the special visitors gallery today are the nearest and dearest of the member for Kennedy, his family. They're here to celebrate his 50 years representing the community of Kennedy at state and federal levels, including his lovely wife, Mrs Susie Catter. Welcome to you all. I give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Environment and Water. Minister, a recent review found that major supermarkets are in some cases charging more for unpackaged fruit and vegetables than they are for plastic-wrapped produce. One example was loose potatoes, which cost 53% more than bagged ones. With Australians already struggling with the cost of living crisis and some really trying to do the right thing by reducing their plastic waste, how is the government going to hold supermarket chains accountable for fuelling Australia's plastic pollution?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker, and thank you very much to the member for Kooyong for that excellent question. It really is quite outrageous that the supermarkets are actually making it more expensive for families to do the right thing when they're doing their shopping. Bananas come in their own packaging. Oranges come in their own packaging. They don't need to be wrapped in plastic as well. The supermarkets have also walked away from their responsibility for recycling soft plastics. As the member for Kooyong knows, the supermarkets have been much too slow in reinitiating the collection of soft plastics at supermarkets. So we're continuing to work on the supermarkets to roll out the collection of soft plastics again. We are opening soft plastics recycling facilities, including for those very difficult plastics like food packaging to be recycled. In fact, the member for Adelaide in his electorate has recently seen the opening of a new soft plastics recycling facility, one of 60 soft plastics recycling facilities that we've rolled out across the country as part of our $1 billion investment in upgrading recycling facilities across the country. And we're also, of course, working with state and territory governments on packaging regulation. We need to create less of this waste in the first place. We need to make sure we're making demands on packaging makers, like upping the level of recycled content in packaging, reducing unnecessary packaging, getting rid of those particularly bad additives. Of course, we're also banning the import or severely restricting the use of around 500 of those PFAS group of chemicals from the 1st of July. Again, that will make a huge difference on this side. And we're working internationally because, of course, this is an international problem. We're working with countries in our neighbourhood, like East Timor and Indonesia, to deal with issues like the ghost nets and the ocean plastics that are washing down from our neighbourhood, to take those plastics out of the ocean. And right now, today, in fact, in Busan, the negotiation on the Global Plastics Treaty has started in Busan today. This is the final stage of the negotiation. Australia has been advocating very strongly for an ambitious treaty that restricts the production of new plastic and focuses much more on recycling the plastic that we've already got in circulation globally. We are absolutely determined to reduce the amount of plastics being used. It's such a shame that those opposite teamed up with the Greens in the Senate to actually disallow the cost of licences to export our waste overseas. It was your policy when you were the minister. Why would you disallow it?
Order. The acting leader and the Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting. Give a call to the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to help Australians with the cost of living, and what obstacles stand in the way, Treasurer?
Give a call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Paterson as well for always maintaining a focus on the main game, which is the cost of living. The member for Paterson knows that when we came to office, Australians were going backwards. And that's because inflation was higher and rising, wages were lower and real wages were falling quarter after quarter. There were huge deficits and enormous debt, and that altogether meant that Australian living standards were falling. And we know that people are under pressure. We know that people have got a lot of ground to make up in their household budgets, and that's why it's our primary focus on this side of the House. And we have made some good, substantial progress. Inflation is now less than half what we inherited. It's back in the Reserve Bank's target band, and real wages have grown now for 4 quarters in a row. We'll get some monthly inflation data on Wednesday. That monthly number bounces around a bit, but really anything with a 2 in front of it will show the kind of progress we've made since it was north of 6% under those opposite, Mr Speaker. Now, despite good progress we're making in the national numbers, we know that that doesn't always automatically translate to how people are faring or feeling in the economy. We know that it's not mission accomplished because people are still under pressure, and that's why our cost of living help is so important. Getting inflation down, getting wages up, tax cuts, energy bill relief, rent assistance, cheaper medicines, cheaper early childhood education. And we've done that at the same time as we've delivered 1 million jobs and delivered 2 surpluses in 2 years, when those opposite couldn't deliver a single surplus in 9 years, Mr Speaker. Now, worse than that, those opposite, when they had the opportunity to support cost of living help, they couldn't bring themselves to do it. And that means, because they oppose cost of living help, it means that people would be much worse off today if those opposite had their way. On this side of the House, we've come at the cost of living challenge from every responsible angle. And at every single turn, those opposite have argued for and voted for lower wages and less cost of living help. And that means that people would be worse off today if they had had their way. So this is the risk they pose, Mr Speaker, because this is their record. They left behind higher inflation and falling real wages and more deficits and debt, and we have been working around the clock to turn that around. And those opposite are a risk to the progress that we have made. because of that record of coming after wages and cutting Medicare and rorting the budget, Mr Speaker. Now, this side of the House, we know that Australians are under pressure, but more than acknowledging that, we're actually doing something about it. And what that means is Australians would be worse off without our cost of living help, and they would be much, much worse off under those opposite. The biggest risk to household budgets is a coalition government, Mr Speaker. This is why they haven't come clean on any alternatives, because the alternative over there is more inflation, lower wages and less help.
Call to the honourable member for Nichols.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Former ACTU President and member for Throsby, Jenny George, has written in relation to your government's failure to deliver a promised $275 reduction in power bills, and I quote, "With each broken promise, trust diminishes. Social licence has fallen away in regional areas carrying the burden of the transition. Prime Minister, why should Australians trust your government on energy prices after this broken promise?"
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank very much, and I thank the member for his question. Jenny George was indeed a fine president of the ACTU, who represented working people day in, day out while she was there. And then, of course, she came into the electorate of Throsby, and now she's an Australian columnist. Sometimes people change, Mr Speaker. Sometimes they change. Sometimes they change, Mr Speaker. It happens. Mark Latham once sat as Leader of the Opposition. Sometimes that happens, Mr Speaker. And when it happens, that's okay. And when it happens, that's okay too. But what we have done, Mr Speaker, is to make sure that we are delivering on our commitment that we made to take action on climate change. And we know that from those opposite want to have a debate about our plan for renewables, firmed by gas, with their plan for I don't know what, in between now and the 2040s, when nuclear will come in. Well, a couple of little facts. Nuclear energy peaked as a proportion of global energy in 1996, and it's been falling ever since. The number of nuclear reactors worldwide peaked in 2002, 22 years ago, and last year the world added 460 gigawatts.
Pause. The member for Nichols is seeking a point of order.
Mr Speaker, it was about reduction in power bills and broken promises and trust diminishing, and the Prime Minister is not addressing that.
Well, if the Prime Minister is talking about energy prices, and it's a pretty broad question with a preamble about a newspaper article, it wasn't a short question, and I think would be a fair statement. So we're just going to listen to the Prime Minister to make sure he's being directly relevant. I believe he is, and he's entitled to, if you ask about energy prices, he's going to, I don't know what he's going to say, but he's going to give an answer on that topic.
Mr Speaker, and there are a number of articles. This is a regular columnist for The Australian, and good luck to Jenny George, and I wish her well. But when we're talking about a plan to go forward, as the world is, that plan is being driven by renewables and the shift that's happening with the transition to clean energy. That is what is happening. And that's why the world last year added 460 gigawatts of new non-hydro renewables, while nuclear energy generation went backwards by 1 gigawatt. The United States added 39 gigawatts of new renewables last year and no nuclear. And last year, China added 217 gigawatts of new renewables and only 1 gigawatt of new nuclear. Now, the reason why the world is transitioning to clean energy is because they understand not only is that good for the environment, it's also good for their economies. And that is why Australia is a part of that global transition that's occurring. Those opposite want to press the pause button, don't have any plan for between now and 2040s, and won't tell us how much their plan will cost. That will contribute some 4% 4% of our energy needs in the 2040s.
Concluded. We call to a member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to lift wages? Are there any threats to the pay of Australian workers?
Call to the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Blair for the question and for his commitment to getting wages moving in Australia. This government's committed to lifting wages, to fighting inflation, to strengthening Medicare and to building more houses. Those opposite, throughout all of the arguments we've had with respect to lifting wages, have opposed us every single time. Every single time, right from the election campaign, when the Prime Minister was asked whether or not wages should keep up with inflation, and he answered with one word, which was absolutely. Absolutely. And when those opposite heard it, they thought it was a mistake. They couldn't picture the concept of conviction for working people. They had no way of handling it. So they then came up with their different arguments when we introduced the legislation to get wages moving. First, they claimed it would be inflationary, and yet while wages have been rising, inflation has halved. They then claimed there'd be crippling economy-wide strikes. Strikes are now running at 1/6 the rate they were under the previous government. That's right, the final quarter for the previous government, the number of days lost to industrial action was 6 times higher than it is now. So why would it be that they voted against pay rises for Australian workers 48 times? Why would it be that they've done that? Why would it be that they are so committed to oppose the concept of people earning more and keeping what they earn? Because they've done it every single time. Our approach to the minimum wage, the annual wage review, has been to go in every time and argue for wages to be improved so that people don't go backwards. We've done it every single time. They had a complete opposition to that approach. Instead, their approach was for low wage growth to be a deliberate design feature of their economic management, and they delivered it. Successfully for a decade, wages flatlined. But as a result of the changes of policy of this Prime Minister, as a result of the changes of law of this government, what have been the outcomes? The minimum wage over the 3 annual wage reviews has now gone up by 18.5% in the life of this government. That's for the people who are the lowest paid in Australia, earning $7,451 extra a year. On award wages, 14.8% increase over the life of this government. Aged care workers on a 15% increase, opposed by those opposite. Early educators on a 15% increase, opposed by those opposite. The gender pay gap at the lowest level it's ever been since records began because of legislation, opposed by those opposite. Mine workers, cabin crew, meat workers, all earning more and keeping more of what they earn.
Call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The recent Council of Small Business Organisations Australia report has revealed that 3/4 of small businesses are concerned about energy price rises. The report also notes half of small businesses are worried about paying their bills in the future. How are small businesses meant to survive under this energy and cost of living crisis driven by the Albanese Labor government?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. Order. Members on my right. Just going to wait. The member for Lindsay was heard. Order. The member for Lindsay was heard in silence, and she was given respect. So we're just going to give the same respect to people on their feet, no matter where they're standing in the chamber. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And of course, the government's acutely aware of the concerns of small business when it comes to energy prices. That's why we've delivered 2 rounds of energy bill relief to small businesses, Mr Speaker, opposed by those opposite, opposed by the member for Lindsay. Two successive budgets delivering energy bill relief not only for households but for small businesses. because when we say small business is the engine room of our economy, we mean it, Mr Speaker, and we deliver for them. Mr Speaker. All they deliver are slogans and platitudes and contempt for small business. We're also delivering support for small businesses through the CFC and other programs to help them invest in their own businesses to reduce their energy prices and bills, Mr Speaker. That's what we're doing. We're getting on with the job of practical projects to help small businesses, as well as energy bill relief. We deliver, while the opposition delivers nothing but slogans.
Call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport. How are the Albanese Labor government's boost to wages and once-in-a-generation aged care reforms improving the lives of older Australians and the people who care for them?
Give a call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Dunkley for her question and for her advocacy for older people in her beautiful part of the world. Since the election of the Albanese government, we have worked relentlessly to fulfil the mandate required by the Royal Commission to restore dignity and quality back to aged care. There is now a registered nurse on site in aged care 99% of the time. Older Australians are receiving an additional 3.9 million minutes of care every single day. And so far, 136 of the 148 recommendations of the Royal Commission have been directly addressed. And today marks the passage of the most impactful aged care reforms in 30 years. Today, our rights-based aged care bill passed the Parliament, creating a law that puts older people and not providers back at the heart of aged care. Older Australians will receive compassionate and person-centred care delivered by skilled workers who are respected and fairly paid. The aged care system will be sustainable, with those who can afford it making contributions towards the cost of their own care. I want to share with this chamber a story about a duo named Joan and Michelle, who exemplify exactly what these reforms are about. Michelle is a personal care worker on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. She is one of the 250,000 aged care workers who received a pay rise and a tax cut from the Albanese Labor government. And through our fee-free TAFE, Michelle is now doing a diploma of nursing to further her career and become an enrolled nurse. Michelle supports Joan, a 96-year-old pensioner and home care recipient. Joan and her husband John lived and worked in Avondale, raising their family of 10. And after her kids left the nest to have families of their own and her husband John passed away, Joan moved to a retirement village in Nambour. And like a growing number of Australians, Joan wants to live in her own home for the rest of her life. And under Support at Home, that will now be possible. Support at Home will ensure Joan has faster access to assistive technology like walkers or wheelchairs and increase the maximum level of support from $61,000 up to $78,000. Support at Home will offer a temporary boost in funding available to Joan if she has an accident or needs restorative and allied health support. This is how the Albanese Labor government's once-in-a-generation aged care reforms are improving the lives of older Australians and the people who care for them.
Good call to the honourable member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister please advise how much taxpayers' money the Albanese Labor government has committed to spend on agreements arising from COP29?
Order. Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. The acting Leader of the Opposition just going to listen to the answer. Minister,
thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm delighted to take the question from the member for Fairfax. The answer to his question is zero. Mr Speaker, last week the government was requested by other governments to enter into certain agreements and arrangements, which we did agree to. We joined, for example, the Global Energy and Storage Bridge Pledge, which is a very good thing to do. We joined the call to action for no new coal at the request of and suggestion of the United Kingdom government. And we signed the Australia-UK Climate and Energy Partnership, Mr Speaker. And after I signed that with Secretary of State Miliband,
Members on my left, the member
he said, and I quote,
Fairfax, the member for Page. Hang on a sec. The minister is listing specific answers to the question that he was asked about, and he's going through a list. We've got to be able to do this respectfully, and if you've asked a question, there's detail involved, I would have thought you wanted to listen to that. So can everybody just make sure we're taking the temperature down and we're just listening to the minister? The minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the member for Fairfax asked me about agreements we'd entered into. After I signed the agreement with the United Kingdom, Secretary of State Miliband said to the media, and I quote, "In Britain, we so admire what Australia is doing on renewables, the drive this government has shown, and we want to learn from Australia in terms of solar, for example, Mr Speaker." That's what the Secretary of Energy in the United Kingdom said. And it also followed the agreement signed by the Prime Minister of Australia and India for closer cooperation in that most important economy when it comes to not only economic matters but the world's transition, because we work with governments across the board on renewable energy, agreements that those opposite would not be able to sign and enter into. And the member for Fairfax implies that there was a cost. There was zero cost.
The call to the honourable member for Bean and Opposition Whip.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to build a better and fairer education system and support students with the cost of living? Are there alternative approaches?
I should correct myself as the government whip and give the call to the Minister for Education.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the cracking government whip, for his question. See what I did there? Last week, the ACT became the 4th jurisdiction to sign on to the Better and Fairer Schools Agreement. That follows Western Australia, Tasmania and the Northern Territory. That means more funding for public schools, $256 million more for ACT public schools over the next 10 years. That extra funding will start to roll out from July in just over a month's time. But as I've said before, Mr Speaker, this is not a blank cheque. That money will be tied to real and practical reforms to help children who fall behind when they're little to catch up and to keep up, help more young people finish school. And this week the Senate will debate legislation that we have to pass to make this happen. Today, the Senate is also debating legislation to create, for the first time, paid prac. That's financial support for teaching students, nursing students, midwifery students and social work students while they do the practical part of their degree. These are people who've signed up to do some of the most important jobs in this country. People who teach our children, who look after us when we're sick or when we're old, look after women in domestic violence, refugees. And that same legislation will wipe $3 billion of student debt for more than 3 million Australians. It'll mean for someone with an average student debt today of about $27 grand that their debt will be cut, when that legislation passes, by about $1,200. And that's just the first step. If we win the next election, we'll wipe a further 20% off all student debts. Combined, these two reforms will mean that for someone with that average student debt of about 27 grand, we will wipe $7,000 from their debt. And that's real help for a lot of young Australians, just out of uni, just out of TAFE, just out of home, just getting started. And what does the Liberal Party think of all of this? Well, they say that it's a terrible thing to do. They attack a 15% pay rise for childcare workers. They attack extra money for public schools. They attack making TAFE free. And they attack making university degrees cheaper. I've heard more no's and more dribble from the Liberal Party in the last week than I have from my 3-year-old, and less sense. This reckless and arrogant Liberal Party that seem to not understand the power of education or what it can do, but we do, and so do the Australian people.
Call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. As you know, the community in Goldstein and across Australia has been shattered by the tragic deaths of Holly Bowles and Bianca Jones due to methanol poisoning in Laos. The community's priorities are to provide Holly and Bianca's families with every support we can, to make sure the girls are returned to Australia as soon as possible, and to make sure that a proper process occurs to prevent this from happening to other young travellers. Prime Minister, can you update this grieving community on what the government is doing to bring Holly and Bianca home?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Goldstein for her question and for her leadership of her local community, which is devastated, as are other Australians, by the tragic loss of these two young women, Bianca Jones and Holly Bowles, two young Australians who had such bright futures ahead of them, travelling as young Australians do, and unfortunately not coming home in a way in which their parents and their community and their loved ones would have wanted to see. There has been a flood of grief in your local community, where both young women were so widely admired and well liked. They were best friends, and the best days of their lives should have been ahead of them. I know all Australians are thinking of their families at this moment who are facing a grief which is every parent's worst nightmare. There's no crueler arithmetic than adding up all the years not lived, the potential not fulfilled, the dreams not lived, all that might have been. My government continues to support Holly and Bianca's families, just as we continue our efforts with local authorities on investigations into this tragedy. Our officials are working closely with Bianca and Holly's families to bring them home. The Foreign Minister has been in direct contact with her Thai and Laos counterparts. Minister Wong has underscored our expectation that the investigations are thorough and transparent. Australian officials in Laos and Thailand are working closely with local authorities, including offering assistance in relation to the investigation that's underway, and that includes, I can confirm, an offer of assistance from the Australian Federal Police. Our officials have also brought together representatives from other countries who have citizens impacted. They include, tragically, Denmark, the United Kingdom, the United States and others, to coordinate approaches. And we'll also examine what way this tragic incidents that have affected so many can be averted in the future. And we want to work with other governments based upon this experience to see whether any action can be taken. Obviously, it's a sovereign nation, Laos, but I know that they are devastated, as are the governments of other countries who've been impacted by this. And I undertake to certainly keep the member for Goldstone informed as these investigations progress, and also to work across the parliament. I mean, this isn't a party political issue. This is something that, if it can be averted, we should be a part of any action that can do just that. But I conclude where I began, by expressing my extreme and sincere condolences to the families of these two fine young Australians who tragically left our shores with the best of intentions, I'm sure full of joy and hope, and tragically will not be able to return due to this incredibly sad tragedy.
Call to the honourable member for Aston.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. What measures are the Albanese Labor government pursuing to address net overseas migration? What has been the response, and does this represent a consistent pattern?
Give a call to the Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Aston for the question, and this fits in with the fourth of those issues that I referred to before, the government's determination to lift wages, to fight inflation, to strengthen Medicare and to improve access to housing. And I think we were all a little bit astonished last week when a measure that the Leader of the Opposition, the Opposition generally, had connected to improving access to housing, that is, starting to hold back the net overseas migration numbers, particularly with respect to student visas, when we discovered that the opposition would be opposing that strategy. Opposing it notwithstanding they had called for it, opposing it notwithstanding that they had welcomed it. And the member for Aston asks if there's a pattern here, and I think there might be, Mr Speaker. I think there might be. Because, yes, they said that they wanted to fix the migration system. Yes, they said that international students overstaying visas, they described that as a modern version of the boat arrivals, and yet they ended up voting against the government having the power to put caps in place.
For Bowman.
It's part of the pattern of reckless arrogance that we see from those opposite, because there are policies like one I referred to before, where they're up front, they're opposed to it, and when they give all the speeches opposed to wage rises, we know they're going to vote against wage rises. But the other half is, if they give speeches in support of something, they're going to vote against that too. And it's been fairly consistent the whole way through. So they said they cared about the housing crisis, but they vote against every single measure to build more houses. They said they cared about the cost of living, but when cheaper medicine's put in place, what do? They vote no. They said they cared about energy bill relief. When energy bill relief is put in front of them, what do? They vote no. They said that they cared about getting the skills there for people in the trades to be able to build more homes, but what do when we bring forward free TAFE? They vote no. They gave speeches about young people being in debt, but what do when there's legislation brought in by the Education Minister that's about reducing student debt? They vote no to it. What do they do when it comes to each issue here, particularly, of all the ones, migration? When there is something to contain migration, it doesn't matter how many speeches they've delivered about it, they vote no. The reckless arrogance of those opposite is consistent as it is that you know. If they say they're against something, they probably are, and if they say they support something, they're against that too.
You called the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. South Australian Rick Valheim lost both his legs to diabetes and now relies on electricity-powered devices, including his motorised wheelchair. His wife Lynn said that without power they can't lift him out of bed. Their electricity bills have increased from around $900 to $1,400. Why are Australians paying the price for Labor's reckless energy policies?
Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you. Well, the question for the member for Sturt is why the member for Sturt voted against energy price relief. Not once.
Order. Members on my left.
Not once, but twice voted against energy bill relief. And I hope that the member for Sturt, whose electorate I was in just a few weeks ago, launching our education policy to take money off the debt of young Australians with HECS. I hope that the member for Sturt has told his constituent, and indeed all of his constituents, that firstly they concealed a 20% rise in their electricity bills. It was before the election that indeed the member for Hume introduced a special regulation to make sure that that was hidden from the constituents in Sturt. And I hope that the member for Sturt has apologised to his constituent for voting against the energy bill relief scheme. I hope that the member for Sturt has told his constituent as well that when this government worked with state and territory governments to put caps on coal and gas prices and the support for rebates for households and businesses as part of that plan, that he voted against it. He didn't want it. He regarded that as an intervention into the market that was unnecessary, even though that global spike in prices was having an impact. And I hope as well that the member for Sturt, because I know that Claire Clutterham will certainly be telling the member for Sturt's constituents that your party policy is to invest unknown billions of dollars of their taxpayer dollars in publicly owned nuclear reactors sometime in the 2040s, and between time that there's no plan whatsoever to ensure security of energy supply.
Call to the honourable member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Communications. How will the Albanese Labor government's social media reforms help support parents and protect children when it comes to online safety?
Call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. The Albanese government has introduced world-leading legislation to establish a minimum age of 16 years for social media. Now, we acknowledge that this is complex and novel reform. As the government has outlined, this bill is about supporting parents and protecting children. And it's about making sure children have a childhood and parents have peace of mind. And it's also about the parliament working together to progress important reforms that will set a new community standard. Now, I can assure the House, Mr Speaker, this legislation is centred on the key principle that supports parents to say no. This is a powerful reference point for society. It also centres on the principle of protecting young people, not isolating them. Social media in its current form is not a safe product for them. Access to social media does not have to be the defining feature of growing up. There is more to life than constant notifications, endless scrolling and pressure to conform to the false and unrealistic perfectionism that can be served up by influencers. Social media is having a detrimental impact on our young people and their mental health, and that is why we are acting. Now, it's important that we support young people and their digital inclusion. The legislation before the Parliament and its associated rules will exclude messaging, gaming, educational and health support apps from the age limit. Examples of excluded services include, but are not limited to, Google Classroom, Kids Helpline social platform, Reach Out's Peer Chat and YouTube. And in protecting children, the legislation features stronger than typical data and privacy protections. Platforms will be required to ring-fence and destroy data collected for the purpose of age assurance when the age assurance check is complete. Not destroying data would be a breach of the Privacy Act with penalties of up to $50 million. And we have made clear the digital ID framework is not in scope and will not be used for age assurance. The government is also providing additional resources to the Information Commissioner to ensure it's equipped to oversee this legislation as it relates to privacy. Mr Speaker, this legislation will deliver greater protections for young Australians during critical stages of their development. It places the onus on social media platforms, not parents, not young people, to take reasonable steps to ensure these protections are in place. I welcome the prompt review of this bill by the Senate committee. I look forward to its assessment, and we will consider further steps in response that the bill should take in the protection of Australian children.
Give a call to the member for Wentworth.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Australians are the biggest per capita losers on gambling. 18 months ago, Peter Murphy's review recommended a ban on online gambling, and this is widely supported in my electorate, including by a mum I met in King's Cross who's working as a cleaner, desperate to help her son escape online gambling and the damage it has done to their family. This parliament had a once-in-a-generation opportunity to stop online gambling advertising. Why have you abandoned it?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much. I thank the member for Wentworth for her question. Well, we've done more in 2 years to tackle gambling harms than has been done by any government since Federation. We've also made it very clear that the status quo is untenable, but we continue to engage with stakeholders on our response to what is an important issue. We have established a mandatory customer ID verification for online wagering. We've banned the use of credit cards for online wagering. We've forced online wagering companies to send their customers monthly activity statements outlining wins and losses. We've introduced new evidence-based taglines in wagering advertising. We've provided direct funding for specialist financial counselling to support people affected by problem gambling. We've introduced nationally consistent staff training.
The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. Give a call. Order. Order. And the House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources and Northern Australia. How will the Albanese Labor government's Future Made in Australia create more jobs in the resources sector with the introduction of the production tax credits for critical minerals, and what is standing in the way of those new jobs?
The call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the hard-working member for Hasluck for her question, because she knows Australia's critical minerals and rare earths are in demand right around the world, and that demand will only grow as we create more green technology, and of course they are integral for defence technologies that need our rare earths. The production tax credits for critical minerals are the biggest single investment any government in this country has ever made in the resources sector. The Treasurer this morning introduced the 10% tax credit for processing critical minerals that will create highly paid jobs, good jobs and wealth for future generations of Australians. Now, industry was active in its development, and indeed that's why industry has lined up to support it. And if I could remind everyone here of the support we have from the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies. The CEO, Warren Pearce, has said, after months of detailed consultation with industry, companies and key stakeholders, it is clear this vital assistance has been well designed and will be effective. It provides confidence to the growing critical minerals sector and demonstrates to the market and investors that Australia is open for business and serious about developing a value-added industry right here in Australia. The CEO, Warren Pearce, goes on to say, talking a good game isn't good enough. We need real action, and the production tax incentive is exactly what industry is seeking. And then the CEO of the CME, the Chamber of Minerals and Energy in WA, has said, this measure recognises the federal government's commitment to supporting industry to level the playing field in what is an intensely competitive global market. Passage of the legislation would set an important investment signal for further value-adding activities and provide certainty for industry. I am asked by the member, well, what is standing in the way of the production tax incentive? Well, you don't have to look far, because it's all over there. It is the members of the opposition, the coalition, the Liberal and National parties standing in the way of jobs in this country, of jobs in their community. On budget night, the member for Hume thought he was onto a winner with a new three-word slogan when he set to oppose the production tax incentives. The coalition have voted against tax cuts, against energy relief, against cheaper medicines, against higher wages, and now it's the resources sector's turn to cop the reckless thoughtlessness of the modern Liberal and National parties. By their words and deeds, Mr Speaker, in opposing this support for the critical minerals industry, the coalition are showing themselves for exactly what they are: anti-Western Australian, anti-Queensland, anti-jobs in communities right through your electors. They are anti-resources and they will pay a price. Well, I say to the opposition, why don't you support production tax credits for critical minerals? Well, it's because you are anti-resources.
Call to the Prime Minister.
And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask for further questions placed on the notice paper.
Last Wednesday, the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Local Government and member for Ballarat raised as a matter of privilege whether an action by the member for Barker constitutes a breach of privilege. The specific action the minister referred to is the filming by a staff member of the member for Barker without permission of an interaction that day between the member for Barker and the member in her ministerial office, and associated filming in a ministerial wing corridor. The minister presented as supporting information an email from her to all members and senators advertising a drop-in session to her office on Wednesday, which I understand is a regular occurrence, and I believe she should be commended for. I have had the opportunity to review the matter raised by the minister, and as I noted at the time, I accept the matter was raised at the earliest opportunity. The task for me under the standing order is to determine whether there is a prima facie case that the action by the member for Barker amounts to or was intended to likely to amount to an improper interference with the free exercise by the member for Ballarat as her duties as a member. I note that the incident complained of occurred during a drop-in session held by the member in her capacity as Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government on subjects within her ministerial responsibilities. I appreciate the Minister's concerns about the discourtesy shown by the member for Barker through this action and acknowledge that she may consider it to be a significant interference in her ministerial work and as an affront to her. However, I do not see evidence that the action by the member for Barker amounts to or was intended or likely to amount to an improper interference with the free exercise by the member for Ballarat as her duties as a member, such as would allow me to find a prima facie case of a breach of parliamentary privilege. Therefore, I do not propose to give precedence to a motion to refer the matter of the Standing Committee of Privileges and Members' Interests. Even though there is not a prima facie case of a breach of privilege, other considerations are relevant in these circumstances. The evidence of the Minister raises serious concerns about breaches of the media rules applying to everyone in Parliament House. I take this opportunity to remind all members that filming interactions in the private areas of Parliament House without appropriate approvals and the express permission of those captured in the images are a breach of the media rules for Parliament House. These rules apply to everyone, visitors and building occupants alike, including members and their staff. I consider it to be the responsibility of members to ensure that their staff follow these rules. Further, I take this opportunity to remind members of the Parliamentary Behaviour Standards and Code, which were approved by the House and the Senate in October. Every one of us is required to understand and comply with the Standards and Code. As the Behaviour Code for Parliamentarians states, and I quote, "All parliamentarians have a shared responsibility as employers and leaders in the community to ensure that our workplace meets the highest standards of integrity, dignity, safety and mutual respect." I would hope that any member who has caused offence to another member would exercise that respect and apologise for their actions. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you for this indulgence and for the manner in which you've dealt with this matter. Over the course of Wednesday, the 20th of November, a new staff member from my office recorded footage of me in various locations in and around Parliament House, including in the ministerial corridor. These recordings, while taken in error, were in no way covert. I acknowledge the error. I note that I have apologised to you and, through you, to all occupants of this building for those actions. I have now re-familiarised myself with the rules for media-related activities in Parliament House and its precincts and have, as requested, brought those media rules to the attention of all of my staff. I note, however, that in raising this matter, pursuant to Standing Order 51, Minister King has alleged, amongst other things, that I filmed in the ministerial suite, and that I downloaded the footage onto a laptop. I reject those allegations. Unbeknownst to me, after capturing footage in the ministerial corridor, my staff member continued recording as I entered the reception and meeting room of the minister's suite. On returning to my office and having been made aware of that footage, the member of my staff was directed to delete it. That fact was contemporaneously confirmed when the Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms spoke with my staff member, who apologised, accepted responsibility and confirmed that the footage had been deleted. I have apologised to Minister King. The filming in her suite should not have occurred, and I accept responsibility for my staff member's error.
Non-indulgent, the Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and in the manner in which you have handled the matter. And as you know, the matter does relate to an incident that occurred in my ministerial office last week during a drop-in session, which I do hold on a regular basis for all members of Parliament, regardless of political persuasion, to come and talk to me about projects that you have in your electorates. And it's something that I feel is in the legacy of Simon Crean, who used to do that when we were last in government as well, and I've continued that tradition. As I've already outlined to the House, I do consider it was a significant breach of the rules during the drop-in session when it did become evidence that there was filming taking place during that without any prior request or any consent from me. I accept the member for Barker subsequently rang me to apologise. I accept the apology which I note has been made on behalf of his staff member. If that's how he'd like to explain it, then that is a matter for him. I do want to make the point that in the last week of the parliamentary calendar that Australians do expect and deserve and to see parliamentarians conduct themselves in a manner befitting this place. That goes to respect for each other and for the rules we've established as we go about our jobs. We've now codified that behaviour, and I do hope that the member reflects on that as he goes forward in doing his job.
We shall move to papers. I present the Commonwealth Ombudsman Quarterly Reports under Section 712F6 of the Fair Work Act 2009 for the periods 1 July to 30 September 2023, 1 October to 31 December 2023, 1 January to 31 March 2024 and 1 April to 30th June 2024. And the Leader of the House.
Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.